I'm Shane Bobby, and I taught for over 20 years and have spent the last 10 years guiding high school students on their journey to college. One thing I've discovered is that everyone's college experience is different. That's what this podcast is about. What are the things students didn't learn in high school that can help them transition and succeed in high school, in college? Today, I'm meeting with Mark Salisbury from tuitionfit.org. Mark, did I pronounce your last name correctly?
Yeah, you got it. It's like
good. All
right.
State. From tuitionfit.org, a fascinating endeavor by Mark to help make sense out of what is one of the most confusing elements of education, really, for a lot of students, and that would be the financial picture. So, Mark, would you tell us a little bit about who you are, what you did, how you got there?
Yeah. So, Shane, I grew up in Minnesota, and as some people would say, that's up in North Texas.
there's for us, there's Texas, and then there's not Texas. That's kind of how we look at the map.
So I grew up in Minnesota, and I had one of those stories of going to college and then transferring a few times and taking 7 years to finish, and trying to be a rock star in between there, which is a different podcast. We'll talk about that later. And then spent 25 years working in colleges and universities. I started out as a college soccer coach, and I spent 11 years coaching college soccer, both men and women, and burned out pretty good after about 11 years of doing that, I gotta say.
It took me 20 years of high school soccer coaching to get burned out. I didn't know you were a soccer coach, man.
Yeah, we have lots to talk about. After that, I sort of moved over to doing admissions stuff because I'd been doing admissions all along anyway. When you're in athletics, you oftentimes are doing lots of talking about the college and doing admissions type stuff and working with admissions all the time as a part of the recruiting stuff. So familiar with that space and spent 3 years in there full time. And as I did that, I just thought, you know what, I think I want to go back and actually do a PhD on how this whole college thing works. Because, after a while of seeing it, how it plays out, you're like, wait a minute, I don't get it. So I went back and I got a spot as a PhD student, a little bit older than most PhD students, but nonetheless, and did a PhD studying higher education, studying how college works, when it doesn't work, why doesn't it work, how do students learn. Did a lot about how students make decisions to choose to go to college and choose to do different things when they're in college. And then what happens when they get out? Does it pay off? Does it not pay off? For who? And after I finished my PhD, I spent 8 years doing probably the nerdiest job title ever, Director of Institutional Research and Assessment at a small college in Illinois. And, my job really was know everything you can know about all the data that's going on at this college, and then figure out how can we get better at what we do the next time we do it. And let's use information and data collection and whatever else we can find out to inform those decisions. So 8 years of doing that, I started thinking about doing something different. And the thing that was gnawing at me was something that I'd seen my whole career, which was the public is just so frustrated with the way that college pricing works. When I went to college back in the 80s, you had a sticker price, and that's what most people paid. So you could look at school sticker prices and go, yeah, okay, well, that school's going to be affordable, that school's going to not be affordable. You might get some scholarship money, you might not. It's going to be a small scholarship for most people, if anything. So you can use that sticker price as a metric to decide if that school is going to be affordable or not, should you choose to apply and actually go down that path. 40 years later, sticker prices are over the moon, and 90% of students don't pay them. They pay something less than that. And then when you look at the average prices that students actually pay, you're like, wait a minute, the average price is half the sticker price. So anybody with a little bit of math chops goes, wait a minute, okay, so if the average price is half, where's the individual prices? Well, they're scattered between 0 and the whole thing. Well, if the whole thing's 80 and the zero is still zero, that means the average is pretty useless for any individual. That means your price at any given school could be 20 grand on either side of that average. That's for 1 year.
Mm-hmm.
So the sticker price and the average price become really useless numbers. And the public is just trying to figure out, like, if I'm going to go visit a campus and then I'm going to spend $100 on an application and then I'm going to take the test an extra time if I do that because I want to try to get in or get some more scholarship, and then spending all this money on that stuff, nobody wants to end up in a space where come March they get accepted and then said, oh, by the way, we've awarded you $300 in books. So it's only going to cost you $76,000 to come here. Lucky you. And the family's in a position where that's not even close to what they could potentially afford. And the frustration that goes with that's over the moon. So the public's been going nuts about this for a while, and it just keeps getting worse. And set that on one side of the equation, then in the world of colleges and universities that I spent a lot of time in, which is not big brand name colleges and universities, but essentially everybody else, all these schools are having a hard time getting enough students. And the reason is because the sticker price scares people off. And you got schools where the sticker price is crazy high, and yet the average knucklehead on campus is getting a 70% discount, right? But a typical shopper goes, well, that price is crazy high. And what organization in their right mind gives everybody a 70% discount? Well, I'm going to just make sure I don't get my heart broken. So I'm not even going to bother looking at that place when it's actually a pretty cheap place and they do a great job. So we got this crazy mess where the public's like, I don't know what to do. And then this, out of these good colleges that can't get enough students, like, this is a crazy system. Like, nobody likes it, but we still do it.
Mm-hmm.
At that point, it was like, well, wait a minute, we got to try to fix this. Does anybody else want to do it? Nope. All right. So I'm foolish enough to try. Let's just see if we can crowdsource it and build a data set for the public so that everybody can find out these actual prices and get to a place where people can make better choices.
And that's
how TuitionFit was born.
Yeah, this is tuitionfit.org, right?
.org, yep.
So tuitionfit.org is the website. When a parent goes and visits the website, like, what can they expect to see?
So it's set up to sort of be useful for people throughout the search process, but in reality, it really kind of makes a lot of sense at two different places. So let's say this family's a couple of years away from searching, from applying to college. Family's going to go there. They're going to see a bunch of text and a bunch of stuff, but they're going to be able to sign up for free because you can create a free account on TuitionFit. And then it'll ask you to plug in an EFC, which you don't have to have completed the FAFSA to get an EFC. There's hundreds of EFC calculators out there that'll give you a ballpark. And yeah, the EFC formula is going to change in a couple of years, but for now, still use that estimator. You just get a ballpark number from one of these free estimators. And then you just need to plug in a high school GPA. You won't have a test score at that point anyway, especially not one that you're going to use when you apply to college. You might have a 9 on the ACT or something, right? Because you took it as a 9th grader or something. So just set that aside. You got a GPA. Well, the way that colleges organize their prices is really just based on those two metrics of need, which they use EFC as a sort of proxy for, and merit, which they use a high school GPA and a test score for. So when you got those two numbers, you can plug them in, and then for free, a family can see immediately all of the offers that we have in our system that were shared with us by students from the same situation as you. Same EFC generally, same high school GPA generally. And then as a family, you can just filter that list by whatever your price range is. So if you're like, we don't want to pay more than 15 grand a year to go to college for our son or daughter, whenever it is, a couple of years from now, plug that number in on a little slider, and right away you get a list of schools that last year offered a student like you a price 15,000 or less. You can move that slider around again if you want, but you just get a list. So right out of the gate for free, you got a list of schools that you know are in your price range. Mm-hmm. It's not going to be every college in the country that might fit that criteria, because we got like 10,000 data points, but still that's not as many as there would be. But we're not trying to give you every college, because we're trying to reverse the order here. We're trying to help people use price as the first filter and then dive deeper to find a college that will for sure fit their price tag. Because the problem today is when people go to college, accrue a bunch of debt and quit, or graduate with a bunch of debt and then can't do the stuff they want to do because they got a big debt payment coming and the thing they want to do won't pay them enough, right? So we're trying to set it up so that from the very beginning of the search, you don't end up in that ugly place at the very end of college, right? So what families can get from Tuition Fit for free is just get a list of schools. If they want to go deeper and see all the prices that go with that list, they can pay a $49 fee and get all that pricing information.
Okay.
So that's Tuition Fit at the early stage.
Okay.
And the whole idea is, look, have a list in which, however big you want that list is, however many schools you want to apply to, have a list where every single school that you apply to is a school where, one, you got a reasonable chance of being accepted, and two, when they do accept you, there's a reasonable chance that the price they ask you to pay is still going to be in the ballpark, so that that's a school you can actually consider.
Yeah, we're at that time of the year, aren't we? Because I saw a post on, I'm not going to name universities today, but I saw a post on one of the Facebook groups, and the parent was flabbergasted. The student's dream school was this particular, coastal Colorado, as one of my friends likes to say. And so the dream school was coastal Colorado, and they got the statement, and now it's going to be the $72,000 a year sticker price, which we can argue I got a couple of questions about how that gets set, but then they offered them a $3,000 scholarship, and the person wants to be an elementary school teacher. Like, that makes no sense. And I think it's unconscionable to me that private universities are expecting people to go into debt for an education major. And those are things that I don't know the solution to that. This is where I'm going to get controversial, but the fact that a private university with a $72,000 a year cost of attendance offers an elementary education major at full price is ridiculous, because the number of people who can afford to pay, that can just afford to pay $250,000 for that degree out of pocket. Okay, that's such a small select group. Students are going to be taking on $30,000, $40,000 a year in debt, and they're going to, graduate with $90,000 in debt. Our second interview on here was with a young lady. She's at Jamie Kirby. She's at NYU, and Jamie went into the process knowing NYU was going to be taking out a lot of loans. And so we talked, and, you made the comment a minute ago where she said, where people have to do things maybe they don't want to do. Jamie acknowledged that as an undergrad, she's already in 6 figures of debt. And now she said, I'm going to go to law school, because becoming an attorney is the only way I'll ever pay myself out of this. She is a brilliant artist. I mean, beautiful art, but she's going to go to law school because she knows that's what will help her pay the bills to get out of this 6-figure debt that she got from going to NYU. Choices she made. That's, we're in a climate right now where everyone's talking about, student loan cancellation. Maybe that's something we talk about in a minute. A couple of questions for you, given your expertise. So when a family gets that financial award letter from a university, they follow a lot of different formats and stuff. What can they expect from C on that? I didn't really talk to you about this beforehand, but I think you're going to have.
No, that's quite all right. This is the other part of what Tuition Fit does, and your question sort of dovetails with the part of the families and seniors are in right now, right, where they're getting award letters, and they're like, what does this say? what's my actual price going to be? Like, it makes it look like they're giving me a full ride, and then you see this plus loan in there that's basically paying for everything. And we'll talk about that in a second. But what Tuition Fit does, and this is the core of Tuition Fit for students that are receiving award letters now, is look, you come to Tuition Fit, you got this free account already. Now you can upload the award letter you got. And as soon as you upload one award letter, that's your free entry to see all of the awards that other students just like you have shared. And there's 10,000 plus awards in the system now, and more every day as students are starting to get stuff. So right away, you got free access to essentially like a True Car for college prices, or a Kelley Blue Book for college prices.
You're the Carfax of college prices.
Right. I mean, that was the idea here, right? Like, people or parents, like, you remember 20 years ago, there was no way to know what your price was going to be to try to buy a car. And it was a really daunting experience. Meanwhile, the car dealers knew that if they could get you to stay in the sales manager's office for 45 minutes or longer, they'd make the sale. And that was the data that they would share with all the salesmen. So that's why they'd go and take 45 minutes to get you a hot dog, because it was going to just keep you in the office, right? But as a consumer, you didn't know that, right? So what we're doing with Tuition Fit is just creating that fair playing field, right? So now as a family, the first thing we do is we decode that award letter for you. We redact all the private information, so all your private information is totally protected, and we never sell that stuff. We don't do anything with it except for just hide it under a lot of dirt so that it's protected. And just get to what's the price that's going to be on your bill if you choose to go to that school. And this is where Tuition Fit, when you create your account and share your award letter, not only do we clean yours up and show you what your price is, now when all these other prices that are shared by other students, you can see the award letter that they came with. The redacted version, because we've protected everybody's anonymity, but you can see all these different award letters and how they get laid out, and you can start to figure out, okay, oh, I see how that one got to be what it is. There is a template that the federal government suggests schools use, and a very few set of schools use that template. And it's a great template. It's actually really helpful.
Yeah.
But most schools don't. And so what you'll oftentimes see is just a big list of names and dollar amounts. And you won't see that some of those are loans and some of those are awards. And it might not even say loan. Sometimes it will. And it might not even say that that's a loan that you're not necessarily guaranteed to get, right? If a parent wants to do the Parent Plus loan, that's not an automatic. You can get denied for a Parent Plus loan, right? And we've seen award letters where, let's say it's a $60,000 sticker price. The student got a $12,000 scholarship.
And then scholarship.
Right. And which is just a discount coupon. And then the school put in there a $48,000 Parent Plus loan so that your costs aren't anything. But that plus, whoa, that plus loan's not real, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we throw out the plus loan. We'll throw out, if work studies in that award letter, we throw that out too, because that's
Let's talk about work study for a second.
Yeah, sure.
So the common is a $3,000 work study that gets tacked on there, $1,500 a semester. Mm-hmm. And what parents don't understand is, one, that work study job isn't guaranteed. So the kid could get to campus and there not be a job available.
Right.
Two, that money is going straight to the student. That money is not going to the bursar's office to go get counted against the tuition fee. Right. It's going in their student. And I realize every 18-year-old out there who first gets to campus and discovers a lack of parental supervision and beer, they make really responsible decisions with that $3,000. And so
I think it took me 7 years to finish college, man.
You and Bert Kreischer. No, yeah, it's absolutely.
Yep.
And so that's a little, to me, seems somewhat insidious. I don't deceptive. Right. Maybe insidious is too.
Well, it's the whole idea behind the work study is a good idea, right? Students come to college and we help them with a job to help pay for college, and we'll have a job. And it used to be that every school got enough work study money from the government so that it covered all the work study jobs. Now you've got way more students that qualify for work study at a given institution than there is money for them. And there's a lot of schools that put their own money into that work study pot just to try to get enough jobs there for those students. Great, awesome. The problem with the work study jobs is, one, like you said, goes in the student's pocket, and some students are responsible, some not so much. Two, they might not have a work study job for every student, because they got more students to qualify for them than they got money to spread around. And three, they might have a work study job, but guess what? That job and the time that you are scheduled for it conflicts with one of the courses you need to take to stay on track to graduate in 4 years. And that's the only job they got because you're a freshman. So now what do you do, right? And that's not a trade that anybody should take, to then take an extra year of college just so they can get the work study job. Like, that's nuts, right? Mm-hmm. And fourth, oftentimes there's jobs off campus that'll pay more than the work study.
Yeah.
Right. So there's a whole bunch of stuff in there, but of course those are not guaranteed either. The point is that it's money that gets woven into an award letter to make your price look lower than it actually is. And that could be displayed in such a way on that letter so that it's very clear that here are some other funding resources that you could or could not take advantage of if you choose. Or, yeah, it's all part of the same package and your price actually is going to be $1. Like, isn't that awesome? And unfortunately, for a lot of schools, the financial aid award letter is ultimately, it's a marketing tool, not a transparency and accurate information tool. Because the way that colleges work now is that the colleges believe that sticker price is a reflection of quality as the public sees it, right? So more expensive school must be better. So I'll get more applications. And so the school leaves that sticker price way up there. But the sticker price has nothing to do with closing the deal for the school. That's where all the discount stuff comes in, right?
Yeah.
So the two things have been completely separated from each other, right? So sticker price only is about signaling quality. And the belief is still that it does that. They don't like the idea that, in fact, it doesn't do that for lots of people now. Now it repels people more than it attracts. And then the discount and all the ways to clarify that on that award letter, because that's about closing the deal, not giving people accurate information to make a better choice. The award letter, the tendency at colleges and universities is to use the award letter to close the deal as opposed to communicate clear information.
Well, isn't it like if Coastal Colorado has an applicant, they're going to offer them a $30,000 scholarship because no one's going to Coastal Colorado. And when I feel bad for every senior that ever exists, because the only question they get from any adult in their life, not named their parents, the entire senior year is, so how's the college application process going? And man, that comes from a place of love, right? Where they want to find out how it's going for you. They're excited for the kid, but man, the poor kids just get beat down with that question over and over again. And so when the parent gets asked that, or when the kid gets asked that, like, well, why did you choose Coastal Colorado? Well, because they offered me a great scholarship. They offered me a $30,000 scholarship, which is what you mentioned earlier. They offered you a $30,000 coupon, right? Everyone gets that scholarship because they recognize that no one's coming there unless they get that scholarship. How did that whole process? Because I think it was when we first met and you talked to me about that, you had a really good assessment of how that whole process started.
Yeah, I was lucky enough to give a TED talk about this a couple of years back. You know, in the 80s, colleges started to do this, what they call the Chivas Regal effect, which is believe that the public equates price with quality, right? And anybody who's ever gone shopping for bourbon understands this, right? They see all these bourbons and the fancy named Chivas stuff is the most expensive. And crazy enough, old moonshine is the cheaper one, right? I don't know why, But anyway, we can get in that. No, that's a different podcast, right? But so colleges got on this bandwagon, and colleges are very much a herd mentality thing. So if one school starts doing something that works, then a bunch of other schools start doing it that works, and pretty soon it's to keep up with the Joneses thing. So colleges got on this train, and then they just kept going. And it's a kind of a Faustian, like sell your soul to the devil kind of a deal here, right? Because once you start saying that your price has to be that high because of how good you are and the quality that you provide and the resources that you give students and everything else, you can't then the next year just drop your price a ton and say like, oh, we're just kidding. We can do this really cheap. Because every student that's already there is going to turn on you and say, no, you don't, right? So you can't get off that train once you got on it.
Okay.
Colleges on that train, it's left the station, we're in trouble, right? Meanwhile, that whole model only really works if family incomes go up at the same rate as those prices go up, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, guess what? For 80% of Americans, family incomes have been flat for decades. For the really wealthy, incomes have gone up. That's great. But we have way more colleges than kids from the really wealthy. And the really wealthy, turns out they're having less and less kids anyway. So the college is like, well, we got to get everybody else to come to college, right? Because we got all these seats and we got all these faculty that we've tenured. So now we're stuck with them for 30 years, right? So we have to pay, like, so then the colleges were like, okay, well, now we're going to have to start giving out more aid to get people to actually be able to come because they can't afford the sticker prices that we keep throwing up there because it's all about quality. So as the quality thing, just that train just is gone. Then underneath that, the college was like, all right, well, we got to give more discounts. All right, well, we'll have another scholarship. Well, we got another scholarship. Well, we got another scholarship. And about a decade after the sticker price thing goes up, somebody somewhere goes, oh, it seems like everybody's getting a scholarship. We better track that. And so in the 90s, somebody did some research and went, wow, looks like the average discount's about 25%. We better pay attention to this. 26, 27, 32, 35. Now, the most recent numbers are average discount off the sticker price is 55%.
Wow.
And so it's just a function of, we went on this train with sticker prices. There was no way the public could continue to pay those because their incomes didn't go up and other things got more expensive, like healthcare. So we're going to have to start giving out more discounts. And again, once that train leaves the station, you can't get it back. And so we've got this runaway system that's totally unsustainable. And people have done the math and sort of said, like, yeah, at this point, this year, it's going to be somewhere down the future, it's going to be $1 million to go to college, but the discount's going to be $997,000. It's absurd, right?
Well, so that is in setting tuition. This has been my perception. Like basically what colleges do, if you start digging through College Navigator and stuff like that, pretty consistently, you'll see that year to year, tuition goes up about 3%. That seems to be a really kind of constant range. But it doesn't seem like that is in any way related to any kind of cost. How do it back in the Stone Ages when colleges initially set their tuition rate? How did they set their tuition? Because it doesn't sound like the tuition bears a whole lot of resemblance to the actual cost of delivering the service.
Right. No, it doesn't. And some of that is a function of, for a very long time, education was mostly seen as what they call a public good. And so education benefits the society at large. And then we'll think about how it benefits the individual, right? Mm-hmm. And especially college, it was really sort of an afterthought in terms of education because not that many people went, right? Like, yeah, it's, we've gone from like 20% of the population going to college to now sending about 70% of the population to college, right? right out of high school, that is. So you go back a couple of decades in this notion that college is a public good. Two things happen. One is, for public institutions, there's a whole bunch more money coming from the public sector to help pay colleges, to pay for colleges. And then you have the people who go work in colleges, faculty and staff and administrators, sort of see their work as first about the public good, not the private good, and therefore willing to not be paid a ton, because what they're doing is sort of for a greater purpose. And you get all these perks of working at this institution, and you get summers off and all. And there's this almost like there's some similarities between education and higher education and the church, and being a minister. Like, you have a higher calling. You're about knowledge and providing information and making the next generation better than the previous generation. You've got all these things going on that have framed education for a very long time. And then things started to shift. And there was a movement toward, hey, wait a minute. How do you decide what your tuition's going to be? How, like, from a business standpoint, how much does it cost to produce one student? And then why do you got this other thing, right? And people see things like college athletics and the money that gets spent there, and they don't necessarily know all the nuances there, but they see this and go, wow, there's a ton of money floating around in here. And all of these, there's lots of people that have written about this, really smart folks, but all these things start to shift, and education and higher education starts to be framed more as a private good than a public good. And so if it's a private good, then it's a personal investment, which means then public institutions should get less money from the federal and state government and get more money from the individuals that go to those schools. And so then when that happens, the school's going, well, I'm going to see if we can get some more revenue from other places, because we'd rather do that than start cutting people. Mm-hmm. And you start down this road. And I'm not arguing that it's good or bad. It's just, this is kind of how it evolved to where it is now. And no organization wants to say, okay, looks like we don't get enough money coming in to keep doing what we're doing, so we're cutting off that third of our organization and all the people there. You'd rather go, well, let's figure out other revenue sources to keep everybody. You've already got systems in colleges and universities to essentially keep your faculty for life, right? So you got a whole other set of systems that makes it a lot harder to eliminate positions. So these pressures all sort of come together so that colleges and universities, they don't really think about, well, how much does it cost to produce a student? And then we'll build it up from there.
Yeah.
In the same way that any sort of private business thinks about how you set your price, right?
And I guess that's my next question would be that. So I've read about some schools doing a tuition reset. It's mm-hmm. not very frequent at all.
It's growing a little bit.
Is it growing?
Still, yeah. I mean, it's still a very small proportion of all schools, but yes, it's a thing that is gathering some small bit of steam, but it's starting to happen. Yeah.
So, Scott Galloway talked about when back in maybe March or April, he did the whole 3-tier thing and had his little quadrant chart where he assessed about 100 schools or so and showed how they're going to land in this as the process. And part of my thought in that was, we're going to see a moment come in the next 3 to 5 years where you're going to see a lot of schools that are closing or merging as a matter of survival. Because you have the name brand schools that are going to still fill all of their seats, but they're going to have to dig deeper down into the next group of students, the students that would probably go to, I hate tier 1, tier 2, because there's no official tier 1, tier 2. It's all crap. Right. But that the next level of school, I'm a Texas Tech Red Raider, right? I would kind of look at us like the second group. A lot of kids go there. They're still, Texas Tech is still going to fill its seats. but then they're going to have to go into more of that next group of kids that would go to maybe a more local school and pull them. And so you're going to see a lot of private universities, especially. I don't know what's going on in Iowa, but our state legislature is about to meet, and they've already cut 5% from the higher education budgets last year. And they're looking at, it looks like that's where the last I heard was the comptroller said they're in a better situation, but they're still looking at, like, there's not going to be a lot of money flowing to public universities. But the idea of a tuition reset, then, of coming in and saying, okay, let's go back and let's calculate what is the cost of educating a student, and then what then would be the right. And what I'm hearing a lot from you is there's been a lot of upward pressure driving the tuition rates, a lot of upward pressure driving salaries for tenured professors. Where there's not been a lot of pressure of supplementing with adjunct professors. That's a whole nother conversation about the hiring of adjunct professors for lower level classes, that whole process of getting grants and getting things like that professors bring. But a lot of upward pressure on salaries, a lot of upward pressure on tuition, and not a lot of downward pressure, not a lot of pressure from people outside saying, look, we just can't afford that. We can't afford, $30,000 a year for 4 years. As opposed to, God, that's got to be hard, man. I got an 8-year-old and a 6-year-old, and I can't imagine looking at your kid who, April comes around and you're trying to figure out where to make the deposit in May. And you've got to say, look, it doesn't make any sense. Mm-hmm. Like, that conversation's got to happen early in the process about what does make sense financially speaking. What can you actually afford? Because I'm soapboxing way more than I wanted to, but
you're getting to one of the biggest things that, and this is where the lack of good information has really handcuffed so many of the things that would normally have played out in a marketplace, right? So normally in a marketplace, you start setting these prices and they go up, and the seller starts setting these crazy high prices. And the public says, no, I'm not. And in the meantime, somebody else comes in and says, there's a whole bunch of people who won't pay that, but we figured out a way to do what we do for a lot less. Go big, come out with your thing, tell them that your widget's just as good as this other one, or reasonably good enough, and it's half the price. And all of a sudden, you're selling a ton of those because the public goes, yeah, that makes sense. And then the folks that were setting their prices over the moon go, all right, they're dropping our price. And you see the marketplace do its work, right? Where the marketplace starts to drive prices down because the consumer has the information to be able to make choices that then push prices. What has happened in the higher ed space is, because the actual prices were not available to the public, in place of that, or in the absence of actual prices, you get all this marketing push. And when you don't have data to actually inform decisions, well, you do have other data fills that gap. And that other data is marketing data, right? That drives the prestige thing, that drives the, hey, you have to go to college at this place, otherwise you're going to be a drug dealer under a bridge somewhere, right? And the colleges are spending billions of dollars a year in marketing to drive that kind of response, right? And so it's an emotional move. And without anything to counter that, the public really is in a difficult spot, right? Because on the other hand of it, there's the, hey, without a college degree, you're not going to have a job that pays enough to be able to live independently. And all of those things that people are seeing in the larger sort of professional world and careers that are sort of evaporating over time. So folks are like, well, I definitely don't want to end up living under a bridge. And people are telling me that overall long-term college pays off. All right. So add to that then what we call this another phenomenon called choice overload, which is here's my example. Like I wear sandals almost all year long. Yes, up in Iowa, I'm still wearing sandals right now. The reason I wear sandals is because a while ago I needed to go buy socks. I go to Walmart and there is a wall that's like 40 feet in each direction, 8 feet high of socks. And I'm like, they're all socks. Like, what's the difference? And I'm like, I gotta do. I get stressed out. I'm like, screw it. I'm not buying any socks. I'm out of here. I'm wearing sandals. This is dumb. That's choice overload. When people go in and they get hit with so many options that they're like, you know what, this is dumb. What most people do isn't to do the sandal thing like I did. What most people do is they grab the first 2-3 things they see and then they focus on that, right? And the only reason they grabbed them is because they were just close to where they were, right? The same thing goes on with a college search, right?
Yeah, that makes sense.
People go from the thousands of colleges that are out there to a list of 10, and it's all because of the names that they heard of.
Yep.
Right? And that list is always a pretty poorly constructed list from a long-term perspective.
Yeah.
But mostly it's just so you can get a handle on this crazy thing, right? And so what happens is, without knowing what your price is going to be, you go to that list just to make sense of this whole thing and be able to sleep every night.
Yeah.
Then you apply, you get into a few places, and now it's March and you're faced with the prices that you're faced with all of a sudden. And your options are, at least the way you see them as a consumer, well, I guess maybe I just have to either figure out a way to pay these things or declare myself a failure and not go to college, right? And the public shame that you think is going to come with that as a parent or as a student drives you to start saying, well, maybe I can borrow and make NYU work or whatever. And I still kind of want to be an artist, but I'll figure it out later. You don't have a lot of time to look at your options anyway, because the school's saying decide by May 1, even if they don't really have the clout to tell you to decide by May 1, they're still doing it because that's urgency marketing. That all of these things play out in such a way that you get really rational people to make bad choices.
Yep. Yeah, get your dorms on. And I think that choice overload is going to be worse this year because we're hearing that Harvard's, their early applications were up 17% because all of these schools went with this, you don't need to submit test scores. Don't worry about it. And because mom says I'm awesome, I'll go ahead and apply to Harvard still. Well, and then Harvard's not a great example, but there's still going to be people who are going to have applied to 3 or 4 more schools than they would have, and now they're going to have even more choices. You made a comment earlier about Parent Plus loans. Let's talk about Parent Plus loans for a minute, because I have my uneducated opinion of them, but I'd love to hear your opinion.
Debt in and of itself is not horrible. Like I'm not one of those people who says like no debt ever, no matter what. But debt in context, there's some debt that's a lot smarter than other debt, right? And the dumbest thing you can do is pay for college with your credit card that charges 20% interest, right? Right. Yeah. But in the 2000s, people were doing that. Like it was not unusual. It was crazy, but people were doing it. Put my tuition on my credit card. So on that range of smart and less smart debt, I'm not going to call it dumb debt, but average knucklehead debt. The plus loan is over on that other side. Like it's not the smartest debt. And the reason for that is a couple things. One is that the interest rate on plus loans is higher than the interest rate that you can get for student loans as a student. The second thing with the plus loan is that the caps have been largely lifted for a while. And so it's sort of the fill up the gap loan that people can take, and they don't really think about what that translates to in over a 4-year period. And the third thing is it's not the student taking out the loan, it's the parent taking out the loan, right? And so the parent's on the hook for it. And usually the parent's a lot closer to retirement than the student is,
That's
right?
my big thing. Yeah.
And you take out a bunch of plus loans, and all of a sudden that's ballooned to $60,000, $70,000, and you're in your 50s. What it does for a family is essentially handcuff them for that next stage of life where they really should retire.
Well, and you're going to be, it's a situation where depending on your situation, I mean, if you are, I said situation way too many times. But it's a situation where you're going to become reliant maybe on the student in retirement, because you're going to have to sacrifice that earning potential, that 60 or 70. It makes so little sense to me that if you have to do parent plus loans, you need to find another option. And that really is,
Right.
That's my take on it. One of the reasons that I don't get into educational consulting and into like financial consulting for this kind of stuff is because my attitude about it is so ROI focused.
Mm-hmm.
Like it doesn't make, I think the federal student loans, because isn't the interest rate on those like 2.5% right now?
Yeah, they're quite low. And then, and especially if a family qualifies for a subsidized student loan.
Yeah.
That means you take out that loan and you're not paying any interest
So you
until
get
you graduate. So that's a great loan.
Yeah. $37,000 at 2.5%. You're looking at a $300, $350 a month payment over 10 years. I mean, you have as a student, as a college student, and the average starting salary for a college graduate is around $55,000, $60,000. So you have the ability to pay that back. That parent who then decides, I'm gonna do it for my kids so they can achieve their dream. Long term, you could be sacrificing that person's dream because now you're going to become a sandwich family, or something like that. And it's just, instead, make the decisions about community college, make the decisions about other options. And that, I guess, one of the other questions, and I'd love to hear your opinion on this, is income share agreements.
Hmm.
That didn't, another on a curveball. I didn't think about it till just now, about asking just now. But what's your opinion on income share agreements?
So it's really interesting because they've actually been around for a long time. And there are federal loan programs that are income share agreements, essentially. They're not framed as such, but they're essentially like, we won't ask you to pay more than X% of your salary. So they've been around for a while. Now they're starting to become more prominent. And they're mostly available in the fields where it's very clear, or much more clear, what the starting salary is going to be. And it's very clear that you're in a program in which you're going into that profession, right? So if you're a philosophy major, there's probably not an income share agreement out there for you. If you're a nursing student, yeah. Computer science, engineering, yes, there's income share agreements available. And a lot of those income share agreements, kinds of loans, they're really accessible for the student who is in their 4th year of college. They're almost done with that program. Their likely to get the job is pretty easily determined by how well they've done in school so far. So they borrow for that last year of school with an income share agreement, and then a percentage of their salary is what their loan payment is.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like a lot of these things, they're in the fine print, right? So some income share agreements are structured in such a way that the student's actually paying what would end up being like a 20% interest, like a crazy high interest rate. Other income share agreements are structured in such a way so that you really are paying a pretty reasonable interest rate. So, either way, whoever loaned the money out wants a profit, right? And so the biggest thing with income share agreements is to look at the fine print and make sure it's the kind of thing that doesn't end up structured in such a way that the total money you pay back is not loan shark material, right? Because that can happen, and that was one of the early criticisms of the income share agreements.
Well,
But there's a bunch of them now that are actually pretty reasonable, and there's some institutions that that are, you know, primarily engineering institutions or something like that, where, or nursing schools, where it's an entirely reasonable way to go.
I joke around that 400 years ago we called it indentured servitude, but
Right.
you know, and it is. You're right, because even the loan forgiveness programs that the Biden still today, President-elect Biden, if it changes tomorrow,
Yeah.
he's talking about, or they're a they're a 20-year, excuse me, a 20-year forgiveness, right? So I think people are thinking, yeah, he's talking about forgiving $10,000 immediately as some a relief. But when you look at what they're talking about for loan forgiveness, you're still going to have a payment history of 20 years. And if at the end of that 20 years, whatever is left, that's what they're talking about forgiving at this point. And so it's not unlike kind of an income share agreement. I have one big concern, and that's that back to the engineer versus the teacher, that the engineer is going to qualify for a bigger loan than the teacher is, or the social worker is, because that we know what the end salary is going to be. And so if it's going to be 5% or 10%, then we know what that's going to look like at the end. I do think you're right. Like Purdue University has probably been the most famous about having a really robust ISA program.
Yep.
And I think it's been interesting to see kind of what they've developed. Does worry me as it becomes more. I mean, you saw what we talked earlier about what happened with tuition when people started seeing that you get that brand quality connected with tuition. The same thing with ISAs as you start putting them into practice. What ends up happening?
More and more folks are starting to think about from an ROI perspective, right? That, you know, like you would any other major purchase, you want to get the most you can get for the most reasonable price. And if you pay way less, you might get crap for it, right?
Yeah.
If you pay way too much, but you then can't turn that around into income later or quality of life labor, which certainly is income part of quality of life, right? Then it's not, you got to find that sweet spot, right? And more folks are starting to say, yeah, it turns out that all that research on college students, maybe it's true after all. And that research is 40 years of research that tells us that by and large, the college you go to doesn't really matter that much. It's what you do in college. And the key piece for folks to understand here is that the reason for that is that college is not an instantaneous transaction, right? You go buy a car, you drive off the lot with a car. And now it's all about ROI. And everybody knows, yeah, that car's losing value the day you got off the lot, right? But with college, it's not an instantaneous transaction. You're paying for that degree starting 4 years before you get it. And 3.5 years in, you've been paying, but you still don't have it. And over that period of time, life happens. And you can either put all your work study money into beer and not learn very much, or you can really invest in your education. And I mean, invest time and energy and emotion into your education. And when people do that, and they go get an internship, and they go volunteer on a research project, and they go do some extra stuff in the community, and they develop a reputation, and they network, those people, when they finish, they're successful. They are major successful, and they're successful in whatever they choose to do, whether they graduated from a community college or whether they graduated from a brand name school.
That's the thing Devlin and I got to talking about a couple of weeks ago, is that, you know, he's the president of Improving down in Houston, and his comment was he didn't even finish college. And yeah, they want to see where you graduated from, but he runs a software company, software engineering company, and he wants to see, that's cool that you got that degree. What projects have you created? Or yes, I talk to people all the time I talked to an IEC last week, and her comment was, you know, if you want to go to Harvard Medical, then you need to go to some place where or Harvard Law. There's certain things you need to do as an undergrad where you need to connect with professors. You need to worry about things you can do in your undergrad that will have meat to them. And so my suggestion to students always, you know, so this is the mistake I think students sometimes make, is they figure out, where do I want to go to college? And the first thing they should be thinking about is, what do I want to study? Like and I'm not saying what you want to be when you grow up, because who knows, at 18, I didn't know I'd be running a test prep company. But what do you want to study? What interests you? And to figure that out, then figure out what kind of career field do you think you see yourself going into. So start with that, work backwards to what you want to study, and then find a school. But then my other piece of advice to them is always find a school that when you look at their GPA and their test scores, walking in, you're in the top half or top third of the students walking on that campus. And don't settle for anything less than that, because that's going to give you the opportunities for research. That's going to give you the opportunities for internships. When you decide to join a certain fraternity or sorority or whatever you decide to do. Now, I have students that I've talked to that have gone to Texas A&M and are now at Harvard Law. That's not a transition you see very often from a state flagship university to Harvard Law. And I take it back. I have heard that it's easier to get into Ivy League post-grad than it is to get into Ivy League undergrad. But, or they go, it's all about those connections that you make, the things you do. And so they go from a flagship state university to a place that typically only hires T20 kids, but now they're graduates from T20 schools. And now because they were able to say, look, I did this, I made this connection, they get those opportunities. It's the old, not what you know, but who you know thing, right? And the alumni network a little bit. But
it's so interesting here, because there's a couple of things that, that I think they add up, but oftentimes folks get sort of focused on one piece of the puzzle and then make that the only thing, right? So, take the graduate school thing, right? If you're a doctor, I don't really care where you went to undergrad. I care when you're in med school, right? I care that you know your stuff, right?
Yeah.
And then if you've been a doctor for 20 years, I could care less where you went to med school. I really could, because if you use the techniques that you still learned in med school now, I'm really worried, right? So the same thing's true with the alumni network thing, right? You might get in to an interview that you might not have gotten because you had, you went to this prestigious place, or somebody who knows somebody. But 6 months into the job, if you're a schmuck that can't get along with people and you're not getting stuff done, you're out, period.
Or if you're somebody who isn't used to 80-hour work weeks, because when you're that first starting entry-level guy at Goldman Sachs, you're looking at 80-hour work weeks.
Yeah. If you don't have that kind of work rate, you're not sticking around for very long. And so this, that grit, that determination, that ability to put in that work week and in your 79th hour still be knocking it out of the park. That's not just because you got a name on a brooch, on a diploma somewhere. Mm-hmm. That's the kind of person you developed while you were in college, right? And that's why we see, when you look at some of the studies that have been done of CEOs, and you look at the CEOs of big corporations and what schools they went to, you see lots of big publics. Mm-hmm. You see lots of community colleges. Sure, you see some Ivies in there too, mm-hmm. but you see the full range institutions, and that ought to tell us something, right? And so all the way back to the ROI question, which is, okay, how do you make sure that the day after you graduate, you've learned a lot, you grew up a lot, and you got no constraints? Well, in order to do that, you absolutely need to have done all the things you just talked about in terms of getting in college. And in order to have those opportunities, you need to be a bigger fish in a small pond, right? If you're the tiny fish in a big pond, you're going to get eaten up, right? Like it's not going to work out for a while. You'll be bait eventually, right? Like that's not good. And then to walk it a step back, in order to graduate with no constraints, you got to know you're going into a place that's not going to put you under a mountain of debt. And so all of this to say, it's kind of like everything that we sort of the traditional advice about how to pick a college. like most of that stuff's upside down. We should have been doing it the different way, right? And because the goal isn't to get in, the goal isn't to have a sweatshirt that's, like Harvard mom. The goal is, after the kid graduates, are they independent? Are they successful? And no matter what life throws at them, they can thrive in the middle of that uncertainty. That's what we're going for.
Yeah.
And in order to get to that, it's a very different thing than treating this like being the last person to get into a really, really fancy country club.
Man, I think that's a great place. Thank you so much for sitting down with me today and talking for about an hour, spend an hour of your time doing this. I appreciate it.
You bet.
Great
Anytime. I love it.
I look forward to talking with you again and following up and seeing what you're doing. So, where can people connect with you if they need to? What's the best way to follow what Mark Salisbury is out there doing in the world of college costs?
Tuitionfit.org. Tuition and the word fit slammed together to make one word. .org. First things first, people can email me if they have any questions at mark@tuitionfit.org. I take every email I get and I answer every one of them. And if you've got a student who's a senior and you're starting to see award letters come in, share your information, one, so that you can be sure to get the best price you can get at whatever school you go to. And two, you can be a part of changing this whole structure so that the public has more power and will ultimately drive college prices down. And why would anybody not do that, right? Like, no, I don't want to know what the other prices are out there. I'm just going to walk in and, that's crazy, right? So
why you check the Carfax?
Right. Come be a part of Tuition Fit and start changing the way that the public is able to find a college that fits.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Mark, for your time.
You bet, Shane. Have a great one.